Well, I think my presentation will be somehow interconnected with Evgenia's to a certain extent, because I will be using an example of literature, a particular book by one of the greatest British novelists of the modern period of modernism, Virginia Woolf, and I was trying to explain how Woolf actually explores the idea of collective consciousness. So, in a way, it will be an illustration of how philosophical thought of Gadamer and Heidegger and Ricoeur actually influence our ways of reading literature. But I will obviously be concerned so very much with the notion of collective consciousness. So I will be using a particular text to investigate how Virginia Woolf, who was not only a novelist, but also a powerful social and political thinker, dealt with this very much important notion. So I won't be using the screen. I will be reading my paper. However, I will try to read in a fashion which will allow you to follow. Sorry, I haven't got a sort of a presentation which I could share, but I hope that it will be clear enough. At least I hope. So the title of this presentation is Being With, Growing Apart, Dispersing, Virginia Woolf and Collective Consciousness. As members of society, we are continually called to engage energies that go further than our finite and imperfect selves, and to courageously seek the possibility of a fruitful experiencing of the almost impossible state of oneness with others. At the same time, our sense of a primordial unity with the other and the outer reality is often violated by external forces, wars, conflicts, pandemics, and various forms of oppression, both on individual and communal level. Written in the time between the two world wars, Virginia Woolf's final novel, Between the Acts, explores a human being's search for connectivity and a deeper meaning of human existence, which our being with endangers. A powerful social and political thinker, Woolf voices in this narrative, but also in Three Guineas and her other writings, a deep concern with the threat of totalitarianism. In a surprising return in her fiction to the subject matter of collective rather than individual consciousness, addressed in her earlier novels, Woolf sensitizes us to various dualisms and divides whose seeming innocuousness may lead to a devastating separateness, dispersion, and a failure in executing the positivity of a communal life. Featuring a pageant play with its possible mishearings and misunderstandings, the narrative thematizes of understanding, but also the possibility and inevitability of misunderstanding, which ensues from our finite, conditioned, and provisional being in the world. Shifting her interest in the individual consciousness, which marks her most prominent novels, to The Lighthouse and Mrs. Dalloway, to collective consciousness in The Waves, her last but one narrative, Woolf amplifies her pursuit of the significance of collectivity and collective consciousness in Between the Acts. A prompt for a deep delving into the dichotomies of unity and disunity and collectivity and individuality, the novel encourages us to view understanding, interpretation, and misunderstanding, misinterpretation, not only as interweaving, but as profoundly expressive of our human condition. The ontological question of human design stands in the very center of those dichotomies. Drawing on the intersections between Woolf's and Heidegger's a keen understanding of temporality, historicity, and human design, this paper proposes a hermeneutic phenomenological investigation of the dialectic of the individual and the collective, focusing on the interlocking character of social, outer, and personal inner sense of dispersion, encapsulated in Woolf's laconic but potent statement in between the acts, dispersed are we. Kairological time and collective consciousness. Woolf's exploration of collective consciousness follows Emil Durkheim's line of thinking and his use of the term to explain how we, as unique individuals, are bound together into social groups and societies, how we think in common given our shared culture. Between the acts thematizes the collective engagement in a ritual, the annual performance which, by bringing many voices together to reenact national history, underlines a sense of belongingness to a community, shared values and tradition. The action of the novel takes place on one June day between the acts of a pageant play staged by a small village community in the English countryside. The in-between, however, has a deeper meaning. It implies the interregnum between the Great and the Second World War. The idyllic scenery and the tranquil lives of the characters are in the shadow of the forthcoming threat of the war. Woolf started to draft the novel in 1938, shortly before the Second World War, and it was published posthumously in 1941. Her husband, Leonard, was Jewish, and she strongly supported anti-Nazi movements. They were both on the Himmler's list for execution. The novel explores the problematic of the search for unity and the reinforcement of a system of connections among individuals, but also disunity, potently articulated through the repeated phrase, dispersed are we, while the performance comes to a failure, which symbolizes an impasse in synchronizing many individual consciousnesses. The sense of dissonance relates to the state of a physical dispersion. The audience of the play disperses, and the performance does not come to a satisfactory ending, despite the efforts of its director to activate the hidden potential of the collective consciousness and to unite actors in the common enterprise. Also, dispersion relates to the characters' inner tensions and personality dysfunctions. Both literary and metaphorically, the process of gathering individuals to act in a play indicates the quest for unity, for abiding to the laws and strengths of collective thinking and acting, as well as for inherent oneness which ensues from tradition and its restoration. The performance encompasses the staging of the various times in the English history in a pastiche form which moves from the Middle Ages up to the Victorian era. However, riven with mishearings, the rehearsal turns out to be an experience of dispersal rather than one of social agreement and togetherness. Written before the Second World War and suggestive of the forthcoming military conflict, Woolf's novel is permeated with a sensation of a momentous historical time, the kairological time. The novel's characters are hugely conscious of the significance of the passage of time and the instantaneous possibility of death. The state of an intensified consciousness, which manifests something crucial about a human being's participation in the absoluteness of time, contains murky undercurrents. The thought of the imminence of something calamitous cuts through the flow of time and affects human design. Brought together in the annual performance, the several consciousnesses are aligned in an experience of something unprecedented. At some point, while the performance is in progress, the stage is left completely empty. Everything is suspended in time, and the outer significance of the present time is powerfully felt. This sudden and unexpected pause heightens the sense of living kairos. The now, pregnant with meaning, the now which partakes in the dialectic of the individual and the collective, is the now which joins the performance together in an unspeakable silence. The unsayable is felt rather than heard. Here and now, the overwhelming thought about the precariousness of life becomes central and immanent. The voice of the collective manifests itself in the visionary moment, the Heideggerian Augenblick. An attempt at retrieving the past impacts the way of viewing the present and the future. Crucially, the linear flow of time is transcended in the novel, and the ritual of the performance, repeated each year, suggests the cycle of time. Woolf is looking ahead by going back in time. Recalling the past serves the role of establishing something important about the future. However, a continuous threat of destruction because of the war shatters the possibility of a coherent vision of human existence and belief in progress. The imagery of the sky's fierceness indicates the forthcoming terror. Quote, "Did he hear some distant music? The word was cut in two. A zoom severed it. 12 airplanes in perfect formation, like a flight of wild duck, came overhead. That was the music. The audience gaped, the audience gazed. The zoom became drawn. The planes had passed." End of quote. Concerned with the flux of various forms of social conduct, Woolf depicts the multivalence of possibilities of human strife for unity, its unpredictability, the orchestrated responses, and the rather postponed sense of finality. Quote, "Like quicksilver sliding, feelings magnetized, the distracted united, the tune began. First note meant a second, the second a third, then down beneath a force was born in opposition, then another. On different levels they diverged. On different levels ourselves went forward. Flower gathering some on the surface, others descending to wrestle with the meaning, but all comprehending, all enlisted, the whole population of the mind's immeasurable profundity came flocking. From the unprotected, the unskinned, and dawn rose and azure. From chaos and cacophony measure, but not the melody of surface sounds alone controlled it, but also the warring battle plumbed various straining asunder. To part? No. Compelled from the ends of the horizon, recalled from the edge of appalling crevices, they crashed, solved, united. End of quote. The yearning for unity, as described by Woolf, can be defined as the possibility for change, some important flexibility as the final unity does not materialize. Finality is staved off. Woolf implicates unity as becoming rather than being. This state of becoming allows for a multivalence of meaning and multitudinous possibilities for unified forms of sociality and national identity. Living during the Great War and the Second World War, Woolf understood well that social unity and solidarity could preclude the war. To illustrate the vividness of Woolf's evocations of the unity-separateness dichotomy, I will refer to two important elements in the novel: the employment of the mirrors in the play's finale and the use of the gramophone. Firstly, although in the subverted form, the gramophone serves the role of a chorus, like that in the ancient Greek play. Its repeated discordant wailing, "Dispersed are we," amplifies the pervasive sensation of the irredeemable demise of unity. Secondly, when the play comes towards its ending, Woolf uses a mirror effect in her rendition of Dispersion. The play's director puts mirrors in front of the audience. The mirrors focalize the power of collective consciousness and the powerlessness of humans when they get dispersed. Witnessing to their diaspora, the mirrors magnify the impact of dispersal. Quote, "The looking glasses flashed, darted, exposed, all evaded, all shaded themselves." End of quote. This formidable move is carefully chosen. The performers are stunned. For a moment, they see the reflection of their togetherness, until still lingering, unity still lingering, ruptured by a sudden dispersal. The mirrors do not just reflect the truth, but indicate the deep sense of the violation of unity on the societal level. The uniform reaction, the collective outcry, signifies regret and a wish to reunite. Woolf's veiled critique of totalitarianism in Between the Acts takes on a more overt form in her essay, Three Guineas, the other text which I would like to refer to. She issues her criticism of totalitarianism, beginning it not with the societal and the political, but with the personal level of human life. Reflecting on the male dominance of the public sphere, she points to women's inaudibility and views the silencing of women as the plight of society, resulting in the rise of various forms of totalitarian regimes. Gender inequality, the uneven distribution of power between males and females, is the first and foremost source of militarism and totalitarianism. Between the Acts, coming back for a little while before I conclude, to Between the Acts, the major text which I am discussing. Between the Acts explores the workings of human consciousness, sensitizing us to its composite rather than individualistic dimension. Woolf advocates for the notion of selfhood, which is compound rather than autonomous. Significantly, the form of the amalgamate consciousness that she endorses is one of the ways in which she proclaims and guards an anti-authoritarian, anti-oppressive approach to an individuated human being, to social groups and to nations. The performance, which gathers people of various social ranks, ages, and talents, expresses the deeply entrenched sense of human collectivity, which goes beyond the particularity of human interests. It is the unheard, inexpressible voice of the common, in which the unifying elements constitute the very being of human beings. The mysterious oneness reverberates in the heterogeneity of human experiences. Implying the hermeneutic in between in human acting and thinking, Between the Acts features individuals who hover between sympathy and suspicion, fluctuate between being reluctant to perform as a caste and engaging fully. However, a desire for being with rather than being apart prevails. The longing for being part of a whole, of belonging to a reality greater than one's individual being and acting, wins over. Woolf's understanding of existentiality and authenticity resonates with Heidegger's philosophy of facticity, which discloses the significance of the interconnectedness between being alone and being with, aptly expressed in his words, quote, "By reasons of this with-like mithaften being in the world is always the one that I share with others. The world of human existence is a with-world, Mitwelt," end of quote. Woolf's hermeneutic thinking, which manifests itself in acknowledging the mysterious suggestiveness of the patterns of being, our relational being is part of the structure of being, retains an affinity with Heidegger's recognition of the primary interrelatedness of individuation and sociality. Quote, "Only as being with can one be alone," end of quote. The sense of oneness in transgressing the limitedness of one's life is aptly expressed in the novel by Mrs. Swithing, quote, "But we have other lives, I think, I hope," she murmured. We live in others, mister. We live in things," end of quote. The dispersed performers are symbolically reunited when the stage is smitten with the outpour of rain, echoing a similar unifying effect in James Joyce's short story, The Dead, the snow covering the whole of Ireland. Let me conclude. The momentous time of global calamities such as wars, pandemics, social uprisings is the time of the acutely felt insecurity, which calls for a rethinking of the relevance of community, solidarity, nations' rootedness in tradition, and the exigency of collective consciousness oriented towards the same social goal of upholding the values which can ensure stability and fruitful being with. Woolf interrogates the disagreeable and frightful discordance of human actions noticeable in misunderstanding, whose apparent innocence brings about social plight. Thematizing an eternal diaspora, she searches for its roots in the inner dispersion. The interplay of togetherness and separateness becomes for Woolf an imperative to investigate the reasons for unity and the results when unity is violated. She interrogates the state of society when things fall apart and nothingness seems to hold its grip on individuals. Proposing a phenomenology of dispersion, she sensitizes us to human brokenness, frailty, and fallenness, whose impact is not delimited to individuals, but far more importantly extends itself upon societies and nations. Within the collective consciousness of a traditional English life, Woolf differentiates images which align with a particular time in the English history, but she puts those images in the situation of tension to show the unsettling changes that society is facing. The idyllic and idealized past gets disrupted by a deep anxiety caused by the prospect of the global conflict. Woolf calls the war preposterous masculine fiction. In this way, she emphasizes the value of female reasoning and the danger of social inequalities. The war, which forces historical transformations, shows that the collective well-being of society should take precedence over individual liberties, which are likely to lead to tyranny and totalitarianism. Growing and falling apart from a sense of unitary existence and dispersing is what Woolf shows as a threat when consciousness is trapped inside the confines of the particularity of interests. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your paper. Are there questions now? We have 10 minutes. Just wait a second. Well, okay, I will go with a sort of comment or question. I was really interested about, I was curious about how you could bring Heidegger into a discussion about dispersion and togetherness between a subject in a society. So I'm not sure to what extent the idea of a kind of original Mitwelt, the Mitsein with the others, can really work when you have to describe the way in which positively, in a positive way, different subjects are together and the way they are not. I don't know if it's clear my point, my sort of question. So do you think that maybe this idea of an original being together with the others, is it possible that it might prevent us from understanding the factual and the various ways in which we are together with others and the way we are not together with others? So I think there are very different ways in which we are alone, in which there is a dispersion among us. So my fourth question was just about how you see the idea of an original being together with other with respect to the practical variations of this togetherness. Yeah, and that's okay. That's all. I mean, that was my comment.
Thank you very much for your comment and your question. And I'm just wondering about the starting point of my trying to sort of shed light on Woolf's way of presenting human dispersion in Heidegger's thought. Yeah, so how Heidegger actually sheds light, how we can use his philosophy to shed light on Woolf's understanding of togetherness, disagreement, dispersal. And I think that we can start with accentuating that Heidegger is not, well, at least to my mind, I don't know whether you would agree, but he's not predominantly concerned with this notion of being with. He's rather initially concerned with our thrownness into the world. So he's much more concerned with being in the world. So being with is something secondary. Although he does express his views on that, I think he's very much into the vein of accentuating, or at least initiating his way of philosophizing with this notion of thrownness. So the relationship, it's not the relationship with others which is of the greatest interest for him, but it is our relationship with the world, so our being in the world. And this is which I think somehow predetermines his way of thinking about our correspondence with others, our socializing. So I think, as I said, I think being with is something secondary. However, to my mind, it's pretty paradoxical. It's a little bit even tricky because on the one hand, there is this insistence on showing us as in relationship to the outer world, in the notion of thrownness, but at the same time, he sort of highlights that it is not possible actually to maintain this peculiar kind of separateness with the other beings, and the other beings somehow for Heidegger are very much important to the extent that they can sort of distract us from our actual and authentic being, with being, yes, with the block capital letter, yes. So human beings can, and other beings can be somehow destructive or disruptive in our way, on being towards unity with being, and I think when I try to think of your comment and how Woolf sort of can be placed within this framework, I think it is very much important that Woolf actually uses a theatrical performance as a metaphor for human, for the possibility of human togetherness. And this being with, which is so very much important for Woolf, somehow transgresses the barriers of this notion of being with sensu stricto, because she tries to show that people are actually so very much capable of transcending the space which seemingly delimits their being. So she sort of places the human interactions within the wider context of a human being in the world. So I think this is the interconnective line. I don't know whether I answered your question, but I think that this crossing of the framework, that this basic kind of framework, is something which links Woolf with Heidegger in this respect.
Thank you very much for your answer. Are there other questions? Okay, there are no questions. Okay, yeah. One from Jan Reynolds, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is very interesting. I haven't actually read this work by Woolf, but I will now. And a thing that is a question, I guess, that I'm wondering about is, of course, I guess for Heidegger, there's a difference from what I understand, just from the way that it seems like you're putting Woolf. You're casting Woolf's kind of approach to disintegration and dispersion. And that is in the sense that for Heidegger, there's the possibility of a fundamental orientation, right? In regardless, like there's dispersion and there's distraction and anxiety and all these things you're speaking about, but ultimately there's a fundamental ontology, and that is possible. And I wonder whether, because it seems like when at the very end, it's not a thing you're thematizing in your talk, but you talk about how Woolf despises the war, and she talks about it as like a masculine fantasy, and she's kind of like talking about the like a different type of thinking, like feminine thinking. And I wonder whether, I mean, kind of following Irigaray, people like this, we might say that the very idea of fundamentality, or like a fundamental form of orientation or something like that, is what's put into question by Woolf. And so I guess I'm asking the same question that Fabio was asking, but just from like a second angle, like about whether Heidegger and Woolf, how well they go together in this case. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Well, thank you very much for your question. It's very intriguing, and I think that we and I will try to answer it. I will start with the historical perspective, because, well, Woolf lived at the very beginning of the 20th century. She was born in the later part of the 19th century, so 1882, and she died in 1941. And she is considered to be one of the great proto-feminist thinkers in England. And those issues that she was so very much preoccupied with are probably not very valid today. And the perspective that I was sketching is probably not something which we are so very much bothered nowadays. Yes, however, when she talks about the war and the totalitarian system that she was so very much concerned with, in terms of the masculine enterprise, and she actually blames the uneven distribution of power. She blames male dominance. She puts the blame on the male dominance for the war. What is so very much interesting is that she, as I stressed it, she begins with domesticity. She begins with the domestic unevenness of power. Yes, so she, when she fights for the rights of women, she tries to shows that it is the faulty line of thinking which is so very much responsible for conflicts, for totalitarian regimes. So the same kind of maybe not the same kind of oppression, but a similar kind of oppression she highlights as so very much important in interpersonal relationships on a very basic level, on the domestic level. And she takes those situations of mental oppression, of physical oppression of women, as something which is so very much significant, as something which tells us the very reason why we are to be bothered with this male dominance. Yeah, so she searches for the reasons of war, of conflicts, in something very private, I would say. Yeah, so she starts with this private, very personal level, and well, anxiety, I think. Well, the link with Heidegger, when we think of something pretty much basic in his philosophy, something absolutely fundamental, his notion of being towards death. I think this notion of being towards death, sein zum Tode, is so very much pregnant with meaning in the context of Woolf, because is to a great degree very much similar in her response to our human finitude. So she, not necessarily in this particular novel, but in her other novels, especially in Mrs. Dalloway, she explores this this clash between human finitude and infinitude, trying to actually pinpoint that it is the awareness of the angst, to use Heidegger's vocabulary, the awareness of death, which actually totally influences our way of living and makes our lives authentic. So I think that this is definitely very much the two thinkers, Heidegger and Woolf, have very much in common in this respect. She follows the same kind of line of thinking when she explores the disparity between human finitude and infinitude, and this is so very much visible in, especially, well, just maybe I won't take that much time, but I'll just make a brief comment on Mrs. Dalloway, which is perhaps very much more famous than Between the Acts. In this novel, she shows the post-traumatic syndrome. She tries to explore it, and the moment in which the main heroine, the protagonist, Mrs. Dalloway, actually is confronted with the death of the other, she definitely, for the first time in her life, tries to live authentically. That is the moment when she realizes who she is. Well, of course, it's not well, the death of the other is not the same as as our own death, yes, and definitely this is not the case. This is not something which I want to imply as being the same, but by extension, we can draw a conclusion that this is of utter importance. Yes, the significance of death as having an impact on the way of understanding the human place in the world is so very much vital. Yeah, so this is something which I think this notion of being towards death is something which definitely interconnects the two thinkers.
Thank you very much again for your presentation.